So many long form edits don't mesmerize the audience because of bad editing. They don't mesmerize the audience because the editor doesn't know when to slow down. And it almost always happens in the same two places: when something becomes complex and when something becomes emotional. If you move too quickly through complexity, the audience gets lost. If you move too quickly through emotion, they don't feel anything at all. And the problem is, most of the time, you don't even realize you're doing it. So what I want to explore in this episode is very simple: where and what those two moments are, and why slowing them down can completely change the depth of your film. Now, there are many differences between short form filmmaking and long form, but one of the biggest, and one that isn't talked about nearly enough, is that long form is a much deeper journey for the viewer. You're not just grabbing attention for a few seconds. You're asking someone to stay with you for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. And that requires a very different relationship with pacing. You can't just keep everything moving. You can't just keep things tight for the sake of it. Because if everything moves at the same speed, nothing has any weight with the viewer. Long form, at its best, feels more like a dramatic roller coaster than a constant flow. There are faster moments where things accelerate and push forward. There are slower moments where the film breathes and reflects. There are points where we reveal information and points where we deliberately hold it back. There are moments of tension and moments of release. And one of the biggest mistakes I see in the students I teach from editors coming out of short form is that they bring that constant pace with them. Everything is cut quickly. Everything is trimmed. Everything is efficient. And on the surface, it feels clean, tight, and expedient. But underneath, something really is missing. Because the key moments in the film, the ones where that actually carry some meaning, aren't being given enough time to build or enough time to land with the audience. And over time, that creates a particular feeling. Now, the edit may work technically, but it doesn't stay with the audience. It lacks depth. It lacks resonance. It lacks that sense that something really mattered. And in my experience, that almost always comes down to two things: complexity and emotion. Now, I've been lucky enough to work on a very wide range of long-form documentaries for UK and US television, from political films to historical films to observational films. But the first place I really understood the idea of slowing down complexity was working on the long-running science documentary Nova. Now, Nova is an Emmy Award-winning series in the US, and when you're working on those types of films, you're dealing with interview characters, scientists who are incredibly intelligent, incredibly articulate, but not used to communicating in the way film demands. Scientists don't think in short answers. They don't naturally break ideas into neat, digestible pieces. They tend to explain things in layers, building idea upon idea, often packing a huge amount of information into a single response. And if we just let that play out as it is, something kind of weird happens, and it's not that great. It makes perfect sense to them, but it becomes very difficult for the audience to follow. Now, this isn't because the audience isn't capable, but because they haven't been given the time to process what's being said. And it was working on these films that the realization came to me. The problem wasn't the actual complexity, the problem was the speed at which the complexity was being delivered. So instead of trying to simplify everything or cut it down into something, more basic, I was taught that the solution was to change the pacing, to take that dense piece of dialogue, break it apart and slow it down, to let one idea at a time land, give the audience a moment to absorb it, and then move on to the next. To use space, visual space, musical space, editorial space, as a way of controlling how quickly the audience is asked to understand something. We can put related B-roll with possibly some music into those spaces. And once we start doing that, something kind of shifts. This same material becomes clearer. The same explanation becomes more engaging. The same sequence becomes easier to follow. Not because it's dumbed down, but because it's been structured in a way that respects how people actually process information in our visual art form. Now, this isn't just about science documentaries. It applies to anything where people are communicating, something really complex. It could be interviews, corporate films, branded content, personal stories. It doesn't matter. If you're cutting something where a character gives you a long, dense answer, the instinct is often to just leave it intact or just trim it slightly and move on. But if you slow it down by breaking it into parts and allow space in between those parts, you give the audience a digestible way in. And let's not forget what we, the editors, actually are above all else. We're the first audience. If something feels difficult for us to follow, when we're watching it back in the edit suite hundreds of times, it's not going to get any easier for someone seeing it for the first and probably only time. The second place where this becomes critical is emotion. And this was something I learned much more deeply working on observational documentaries, particularly on the BAFTA award-winning doc series Cutting Edge in the UK. Now, these films are very different from, something like Nova. They're not driven by information in the same way. They're driven by people, by behavior, by interaction, by what's happening beneath the surface throughout the journey that we're with them. And in those films, emotion becomes one of the most valuable sets of material that we have. But it's also the easiest thing to destroy for one very specific reason. Normal people on camera aren't actors. They don't know when they've said something important. They don't know when they've revealed something meaningful. But as editors, we have to see that. We can feel when something has shifted, when a moment carries weight, when there's been a huge revelation that changes the perception of the audience. And those are the moments where pacing becomes incredibly important. Now, if you spent, say, the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years working in short form and your client or in-house producer is constantly telling you to move faster, cut out the spaces, keep it moving, tighten it up, etc., all the phrases I hear from all of our short form members, you're going to have a reflex to cut quickly, to go straight to the next line, to go straight to the next shot, the next piece of information. But if you do that in long form, you cut off the emotion, even before it's had time to register. You don't give the audience the space to feel what happened. Now, sometimes all it takes is a very small change, holding an interview shot longer before and after someone finishes speaking, letting a reaction play out longer than you'd normally think, allowing a moment of silence to exist instead of filling it or pulling the air out. Those are the moments where a film starts to feel human, where it stops being a sequence of information and starts becoming an experience. If you like learning about the art of editing, dear friend, then you'll love this thing that I've designed for your cutting room. It's a periodic table of editing terminology. 50 of the most used creative terms used in professional edit suites in a beautifully designed film poster. You can download it right now by clicking the link below and heading on over to InsideTheEdit.com. Now, if we step back from all of this and, kind of zoom out to 40,000 feet, there's a simple way to think about it. Editing isn't just about what you show or even how you cut it. It's about how quickly or how slowly we allow the audience to understand and how quickly or slowly we allow them to feel. And those two things don't always happen, at the same speed. Think about it in terms of variation. Variations are, it's a big word in professional long-form cutting rooms because psychologically, the audience is addicted to it. I often think about it like the gears in a car. On any drive, there are moments like, when you're on the motorway where you'll want to move up to top speed. And then, of course, there's moments like when you come into a town or a city where you'll want to slow down. Long-form editing and filmmaking is very similar. There are places where the film needs to rattle along at high speed, where information can come faster. And there are moments where we want to slow down to reinforce the impact of what's going on for our audience. Now, if we stay at the same gear the entire time, the journey becomes flat. It becomes predictable. It kind of just loses its shape. But when we vary that pace, when we allow complexity to unfold more slowly and emotion to breathe, we start to create something much more engaging, something that holds attention, not just because it's moving, but because it's changing and every scene feels so unique. So if there's one thing to take away from this episode, it's this. Great editing isn't about making everything faster. It's about knowing when not to. And two of the most important places to practice that are when something becomes complex and when something becomes emotional. Because these are the moments where your film either connects or it doesn't. And often, the difference between these two outcomes is, just a few extra seconds in a few key places. So practice this on your next project, no matter what kind of work you're doing, and you'll be surprised by the results. I certainly was. Thank you for your kind attention, dear friend. My name is Paddy Bird, and this is Inside the Edit.